Call to order the June 6th meeting of the Des Moines Area MPO Technical Committee. Tracy, do we have a quorum?
We are real close. Just a second.
Okay.
I'm only counting 12 and I need 13.
Okay, let's give another 30 seconds, and then if not, we can always move on to non-action items first. Just let us know if we get that person.
We're good.
Great, excellent. Thank you, Tracy. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and call item 2, a vote on approval of the agenda. Do we have a motion and a second?
So moved, Warding.
Second, Neighbor.
Thank you, Dave and Steve. With that motion and second, I'm only going to ask for dissenting votes. If there's any nays, since we're in a virtual format, it'll be more expedient that way. And so with the motion and the second on approval of the agenda, do we have anyone voting nay? Okay, with that, the motion passes. Next up, item 3, vote on approval of the meeting minutes from the May meeting. Do we have a motion and a second?
Motion to approve, Mark Ankeny.
I'll second that, Larson.
Thank you, Mark and John. We have a motion and a second? Is anyone voting nay on the meeting minutes from May? Hearing none, the item passes. Next up, we have item 4. We have a presentation on the Comprehensive Safety Action Plan update. Zach, I believe you're going to introduce the item.
Yes, thank you. So work is continuing on the Comprehensive Safety Action Plan. We have Tool Design and their team here today to update us on what they've been working on most recently. They'll be covering mostly the high injury network is what they'll be focusing on today. But I will turn it over to Tool Design and their team to present their update to us.
Thank you, Zach. Go ahead, Kristen.
I was just going, Zach, are you going to share? Because I was just going to say that I'm not unable to share.
I think we have your slides uploaded.
I have.
Can you see them on the screen?
Oh, okay. Yes. We did make one update.
If you prefer, I can give you access to share.
If that'd be okay, because I have it all.
Fine.
Yeah.
1 second.
Thanks. Just one map we updated, and let me know when you can do that. Thanks.
Yep. Just give me 1 second.
But Mitzi, you could go ahead if you wanted.
Yeah, so maybe while we're doing that, I'll just shout out to the team who's been working on the data analysis, and we are at a next stage. We're excited to share this updated information with you today. And we have John Mark from HDR, Tariq Shahada from Tool Design, Kristen Saunders from Tool Design, and we've been collaborating on this work. So when we get this data up, we'll share these maps with you. We'll walk through some touch points on the past data that you saw, and then walk through what we have developed since then. Okay, next slide. So thank you. We put this in the notes just in case somebody else came across this information. We know this audience is much more technical, so the language we're using, some of the maps and data we're using is really geared more for this audience. It wasn't packaged for broad public consumption, so just want to share that. And these are the 8 major tasks that we'll be working on throughout the process here. We've been continuing to work on stakeholder engagement. I'll speak to that at the very end. We completed the practice and data review, and we are still working on crash analysis, which you're going to see. and have actually developed a draft outline for the countermeasures toolbox in the toolkit for this project. But we'll jump into this new update now. I'll turn that over to Kristen.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Kristen Saunders. I haven't met some of you yet, so I just wanted to introduce myself. I'm a senior planner at Tool, and I am excited to be working on this project. And I worked on the Des Moines City Transportation Safety Plan a couple years ago, so I may have met some of you through that. So it is the same Christian, if you're wondering. So we're going to get into a lot of crash data analysis today, but I just wanted to start kind of framing the conversation around the safe systems approach. The safe systems approach is from FHWA, and it calls for holistically addressing crashes by creating safer people, safer vehicles, safer speeds, and safer roads, and safer post-crash care. And I mentioned that just to say that, you know, one departure from previous crash analyses is that it really is looking at this much more holistically. So not just kind of telling drivers to drive safer and hoping that they do it, and not just designing roads with, you know, more buffer space for vehicles that are kind of acting badly. It's looking at the whole thing kind of in its entirety. And some of those principles are accepting that death and serious injury is unacceptable, and life-changing injuries on our road are unacceptable, accepting that humans make mistakes and we need to design the road to tolerate those. It is a principle that human beings are vulnerable. We have an impact threshold. You know, our body physically has an impact threshold, and there are things we can't tolerate. So if we're accepting that human beings are going to be, you know, walking and biking without always having an automobile to protect them, we have to accept that they do have these vulnerabilities. I should say we do. Responsibility is shared by all. Safety is proactive, so that's a lot of what we're doing today and what this plan will accomplish. And then redundancy is crucial to reduce risk. So if one part of the safe systems fails, the other part should still protect people. So just diving into two of these principles that kind of have a little bit more to do with some of the crash analysis we're looking at and the this physical improvements on the roadway are anticipating human error. So separating users in space, like adding a bike lane or a sidewalk to a road. So really separating different types of road users, and then separating users in time. So things like adjusting signal timing so that left turning vehicles and pedestrians are not in conflict. And then of course, increasing attentiveness and awareness to some of these changes. And then also accommodating human injury tolerances. So one of the big things that we're going to talk about throughout this plan is reducing speeds, which in turn reduces impact forces. And that is because we see that even with a small increase in speed, the likelihood of someone to be able to kind of walk away from a crash as a pedestrian increases dramatically. So I know these between 20 and 40 seems like such a small difference when you're talking about driving, but for pedestrians who are hit by a vehicle, it makes a really big difference. So we're going to talk a lot about speed throughout this project. So just an overview of the crash analysis methodology. At the last TTC meeting, which I was not at, but in April, you talked a lot about the descriptive crash analysis, so the statistics. I'm not going to dive into detail on that today because it was already discussed, but please do kind of pull up that presentation as you look at these, the maps. An equity and environmental justice framework, we are going to talk about that today. A high injury network and a high risk network. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today and how these things interact with each other. So just a reminder of, you saw this slide last time, but from our study period is 2018 to 2022. And you can see a little bit of the kind of statistics, high level statistics for the study area, which I'll show in a second. So that's just a reminder of the study window and the high level statistics. So just a review from that April TTC, the descriptive analysis really focuses on the data set as a whole and not so much geographically. That's what we're going to talk about today. So really looking at things like the top crash causes. And Mitzi, if you could paste this in the chat just so everyone has it for the duration of the project. But you know, looking at when crashes happen, why they happen, and kind of those kind of contributing factors. So this is a reminder of the study area. So we are separating, sometimes we will break the analysis out into quadrants, and sometimes we'll also break the analysis out into rural roads and urban roads, so that we're analyzing them a little bit differently. So just wanted to remind everybody of that. So we're going to talk a little bit about the equity and environmental. I know I'm going fast. We're trying to reserve time for speaking, and also just a reminder that this presentation is a sort of pre-presentation to delivering a memo. So this is kind of a, hopefully when you see the memo, you'll remember some of the things we talked about, and we'll be able to address some of your questions before that memo comes out. So I want to spend a moment just thinking about why we're going to do an equity analysis. Nationally, lower income pedestrians are killed on our street more than any other income bracket. And there are many reasons for this. Two of those are that lower income people are more likely to walk and bike and take the bus. So there are more vulnerable users in lower income communities. And then at the same time, kind of working against that, lower income communities have historically experienced some disinvestment, and they're more likely to maybe not have a crosswalk as frequently. So maybe take that risk to cross a major road without that crosswalk, less lighting on their roads. There's a lot of factors that stems from that kind of historic disinvestment that can result in unsafe, less safe streets. So we do kind of make sure that along with the crash analysis, we're doing an equity analysis to really understand how crashes are impacting environmental justice in your community. So similarly, people of color, and particularly Native Americans and Black Americans, are more likely to die while walking than any other race or ethnic group. So this is just another reason, and John's going to talk on the next slide and the next few slides about kind of what goes into an equity analysis. There are a number of factors. Gender, race, and income are just a couple of those. So we do look at them. We do look at a number of factors, but this is just a little bit about kind of why we're looking at this. And this is these are from a Dangerous by Design report from Smart Growth America, which is a great thing to read if you want to learn more. So I'm going to turn it to John to talk more about the equity analysis.
So I just want to point out that, equity is a major facet of the Safe Streets and Roads for All program. So it's one of the core components we have to speak to. We're going to look at that in multiple areas, both how we're doing crash analysis, but also how we do engagement, and then how the strategies look equitably. So this is just focused on crash today, but the intended outcome of all of it is to get to safety strategies that reduces crashes equitably. But we'll be using the MPO's existing measure of equity, which is transportation disadvantaged communities. So go to the next slide. You can see here that I've just listed what those 7 markers of disadvantage are. And again, they don't all have the strongest link to crash data locally, but they are all kind of purposeful to why there might be existing disadvantage. And then when you start to see them combined into multiple areas, it really does start to have an effect on crash data, which we'll see here in a couple slides. Want to, on this next slide, show where we're seeing 4 or more of these markers of disadvantage geographically, and also note that the geographic units here are census, so they tend to focus on similar populations but not similar areas, so there might be differences in density, but these shapes are pretty spread in the different communities, but not necessarily all communities are represented the same geographically. But you can see here that we focused on these communities because on the next slide, this is sort of our big takeaway for equity in crash analysis. We've got the number of the markers of transportation disadvantaged tracks or block groups on the bottom. So left side would mean no markers, right side would mean all markers present. We've got a blue color that's talking about fatal and serious injury crashes for rural areas. And then we've got a red bar marker that is for urban area fatal and serious injury crashes. And then that line with the dots and percentages, that's if we had a completely equitable situation, that would be the marker, because that's how much representation by centerline miles we have of those areas. And so what we see is anytime the bar chart is over and above that line marker, we start to see that we're seeing an inequitable outcome, particularly skewed towards folks that already have some transportation disadvantage. And you can see it stands out more so in the urban areas here. And so as we move into other measures of crash findings, just know that we need to continue to bring this lens along with it, because while it's maybe not present on certain corridors that transportation disadvantage and crash are linked, on a bigger picture, as a system, it is linked. And so it's something we have to tackle as we go through our addressing these crashes. On this next slide, I'm just going to intro why we are proposing here both a high injury network and a high risk network. You can see on the following slide that these are two angles on the same problem, but both are very important and bring us slightly different pieces of information. So I'm going to talk about the high injury network. And if you think about that in a medical terminology, that's like the broken arm. We already have an issue here. We need more significant treatment to deal with these issues. These may come out as targeted safety projects. They are likely high cost investment, and so we need to focus on fewer locations. Tarek, in a little bit, is going to talk about the high risk network. Now, the high risk network may not have seen crashes yet, although in some cases it has, but that is far more proactive. And so it can be a leading indicator, like, potentially genetic markers you might have that suggest that you're going to have some sort of medical condition later on. The best part of being proactive is that we can cover a lot of locations early on, and earlier treatment can be lower cost and more effective treatment. The main thing to know is that none of your findings that you see today have necessarily intersected the high injury network and the high risk network, but those will be intersected as we move forward and we decide which strategies and which projects make the most sense. We'll also point out unique differences in the upcoming memo. So as we move to the next slide, you can see here that we're talking about the high injury network, and I've got some of the technical details on what's in the high injury network. So we've taken all of the injury crashes. Now we're putting a higher emphasis on fatalities and serious injuries, because that really represents that safe system approach. It's where we have places that even when we have bad crashes, we've got some resiliency in there, are areas where we maybe aren't seeing fatalities and serious injuries. But because we know that that's a limited number of data points, we brought in the minor injuries and the possible unknown injury data just at a lower scale. All of the crashes are tied to a roadway network, and they are normalized onto segments. So we don't pick very small segments, and we try to pick longer corridor segments first and then come back and talk about priorities that are intersections. This helps with not having any sort of rate-based measure really kind of blow up based on just a very small scale. But the biggest thing that I want you to note here is that there is some normalization. So if you've got a downtown area where it's got shorter segments, that does get considered against some areas that have very long segments, like that maybe are on the highway system. And then the other thing to note is that we start out by developing a high injury network that has a split, so we don't hide important vulnerable modes that we've already found in the descriptive stats. And so we have a motor vehicle map that actually includes all crashes, but motor vehicles most dominant there. And we have specific ones for bicycles, pedestrians, and motorcyclists. I'm not going to show all of these maps today because it's pretty significant to get to the right scale, but that's what you'll be seeing when you see the maps in this report. On our next slide, I am going to just highlight that the motor vehicle or all crash high injury network for the region. You can see here that we used a scale for high, medium. And the main thing you want to know about the high injury network is that we try to pick as small of mileage as possible that would make the largest impact to, if we addressed it, getting rid of fatalities and serious injuries. And so that high, those are areas with very high density of fatal and serious injury crashes. The medium high is kind of that next band that we might want to include, and the medium is just the band after that. It's primarily banded by how much of the network we're including here and how much of the crashes that we're addressing. And so we'll be providing some of those metrics, but the main thing that we're hoping to do is focus on a narrow portion of the mileage for the region that's going to have the highest potential to reduce fatalities and serious injuries. So again, just wanted to note here that we looked at that high and medium high for pulling out a select list of segments to the side and coded those by the different jurisdictions that they're within. So you can see that many of the jurisdictions that are part of the DMAPO area have segments, either one or multiple on a major corridor that makes sense to be part of our focus based on the high injury network. On the next slide, I just wanted to look at how, if we changed modes, we might get a slightly different view. This was the map we talked about updating, so we're gonna have to quick share, Kristen, the map that Tarek sent. Otherwise, we'll get the map updated for what goes out. But generally speaking, the high injury network for pedestrians is a lot tighter. And so you see more of those corridors in the downtown area that I've listed off to the right, and less of the spread that we were seeing with the motor vehicle network. But I'm going to go ahead and pass it on here to Tarek. He's going to go ahead and talk about what we're doing with that high risk network now that we've kind of walked through these primer slides for the high injury network.
Hi, good morning. Yep, Tarek Shahada with Tool Design, part of our data science team focused on safety related analyses and projects such as this. Like John was speaking to, the systemic analysis or the production of a high risk network is sort of another way we word it, is sort of complementary to the development of a high injury network. The maps that we were looking at that John walked us through are highlighting locations where we've already seen a strong history of crashes. And so any of those locations, you can look at them and know there is an acute issue there in terms of safety that's been sort of shown through historic severe crashes over recent years. On the other side, with the risk-based approach that we're taking here, we're really studying design, contextual, and sort of environmental characteristics on and surrounding any road that gives us an indication of a correlation with a strong potential for crashes. And what that means is we're trying to find locations that look like they might experience crashes in the future based on where we have seen crashes occur so far. And so to a degree, it's a very intuitive process. If you think of an example of, rural roads that are sort of winding and curving with narrow shoulders and things like that, you sort of know intuitively there are some risks involved in maneuvering that road. Through this analysis here, we can get into more depth about that, of understanding a lot of different characteristics, including demographics and including social justice related metrics, as we'll see. Just a handful of those sort of attributes or features of roadways that we're looking at here as part of this analysis includes lane configuration, multi-lane versus 2-lane roads and how they sort of perform relative to one another. Traffic volume, not surprisingly, we often find that higher volume roads have a strong correlation with increased numbers of crashes because there's just more cars out there. We try not to focus on that one too much though, and sort of see how it interplays with others. Functional class, no surprise, higher sort of functioning roads such as arterials where we're seeing higher speeds may result in higher severities of crashes, as was discussed earlier. Higher speeds really correlate strongly with increased severity. And then sort of in a different vein, we also look at things like poverty level, the number of households in a community surrounding a road that are experiencing poverty, or zero vehicle households, homes that don't have access to a motor vehicle, sort of encouraging or sort of forcing to a degree the need to use active modes that are a bit more vulnerable. Similarly, disabled populations, which also incidentally correlate with higher numbers of older road users requiring, more time to cross roads and things like that. And so we'll sort of see how some of these attributes interplay a bit as we move along. On the next slide, we have a quick visual here of sort of the process that we run through, the logical process that we run through to identify what we call facility profiles, which is really just combinations of these different attributes that are shown to correlate more strongly or more weakly with potential for crashes. And so as we see in this figure here, we sort of, look at everything, every way that we can slice up the roads, considering, 2-lane versus multi-lane road. Are the multi-lane roads more risky for pedestrians? Okay, maybe they are, and we'll grab that one and we'll step to the next one. What are all the other ways that we can split up the roads to sort of identify those higher risk roads? It'll make a bit more sense as we get into some hard examples here. But let's hit the next slide here. And we've got this analysis performed for all of our modes, motor vehicles, motorcycles, bikes, and pedestrians. Notably, we split out the motor vehicle analysis for urban areas as well as rural areas to ensure that we're identifying the unique risks of these different types of roadways. They're fundamentally operating very differently, and so we analyze them separately. So let's sort of dissect what we're seeing on the screen here, because this is a lot of information that is going to be new to us. And so first, I want to draw your attention to just the very top of this slide here, those red boxes at the top, where we see functional class, lane configuration, disability households, and a few others. This essentially in order as they're shown left to right are indicating the highest, most influential factors on identifying roadways within the DeMampo area, on urban roads specifically, the most impactful characteristics on identifying risk. And I want to note that these don't imply a causal relationship. This is a correlation. So just because we've got the surrounding area with a lot of disabled people in these households, it doesn't mean that they're the problem. That fundamental to our safe system approach here, it's recognizing who our road users are and producing systems that are appropriate for them. And so we're not sort of identifying those as risks that need to be addressed, simply as risks that need us to sort of consider in our design and our operation of our facilities. So looking at that critical sort of band at the top, it's sort of that pink color. We see that the most critical roads within the study area here on our urban roads are multi-lane arterials, surrounded with a relatively high percentage of households with disabilities, and a relatively high number of younger population as well. And so we can sort of begin to sense some degree of a narrative there. Arterial roads that are multi-lane, certainly, challenging roadways to cross, and where those higher speeds might result in higher severities of injuries for those who are having difficulty crossing. Folks with disabilities may require additional time to complete those crossings, putting them potentially at greater risk in trying to complete those crossings where timing of signals or other sort of infrastructure components are not really designed and capable of accommodating those needs. As we sort of move down through the table, we see sort of the less and less risky or less and less critical items show up in different sort of combinations of these things. Really, arterial roads and multi-lane roads continue to be at the top. And as we sort of move down, we see the different ways that the demographics play in. So the figure that we see on the bottom, it's a little bit of there's a lot to chew on here, but essentially what we're seeing is the green bar represents the percentage of the mileage within that tier. So on the left, the minimal tier represents more than 60% of the total mileage within the study area. That yellow bar is the percentage of share of crashes, and it's less than 20%. As we move to the right, we see that green bar start to shrink and the yellow bar sort of relatively to that green bar start to increase. The red line is essentially just the ratio between the two, showing us that the sort of more critical tiers are representing a higher density of crashes per mile. And that indicates that a lot of the mileage does have a history of crashes. However, a lot of that mileage will be have no history of crashes in recent years. And so by addressing those locations, we can be proactively identifying opportunities to improve safety. On the next slide, we'll see this turned into a map, taking those results and applying them to a map. And we're seeing, a fair spread. And you might notice that there's a bit more mileage on this map relative to the high injury network. This is, where the proactivity comes in. This is a lot to consider. And it's not saying that every mile needs to be addressed, but it's identifying opportunities throughout the network where we have the chance to make an impact. Let's move ahead 2 more slides, and we'll see the rural sort of complement to that. Noting time, I won't go through all of the risk factors for all of these, but we'll see that in rural areas as well, we've identified a lot of mileage here based on similar features that indicate the need to potentially bring in additional focus, additional funding in our rural areas to complement the funding in our urban areas as well. Let's move forward just a few more slides and we'll take a quick look at the bicycle mode as an example. We can move to the previous slide to this one. We'll take a quick look at some of the risk factors that were identified for the bicycle mode. Similarly, multi-lane roads and disability households were identified as well. Limited English population was identified as one of these risk factors, one of these items correlating with an increased potential for bicycle crashes within the community, indicating, to some degree, an increased volume of bicycle mode usage, and then also increased potential for crashes involving those. Also, some consideration of age, poverty level, and then zero vehicle households again. Let's just move to the next slide there, and we'll see how this maps out ultimately. A lot of mileage here. We're seeing a lot of sort of representation in the grid, and of course in our sort of core urban areas where that focus is really coming into relief there. So I will pass it back to the team as we sort of move forward out of this section here to close us out. And I'll note as well, there's a lot of slides here that I'm not talking about for time's sake, but you will be able to view any of these slides in the deck that's provided after the event.
All right, thank you. I think I'll just touch a little bit on some of our next steps. First, just want to call attention that we have online engagement happening. There's a survey and map that is continuing, and we are running a circuit of in-person meetings within the member communities. Those were really intended to be member community focused. And so we still have a few more of those to do, but we've already got quite a few of them done. And then we will be doing region-wide engagement events. They're going to be bigger events, like they'll be publicized more. We're going to get that information out to this group and to others, and ask you to share those with those event opportunities with your network. Next slide. I just want to share this one, which is part of the online engagement event. We have people within the community who are identifying these 4 different types of locations: places where they feel safe, where they feel unsafe, where they have an idea for safety, or where there's been a near miss. And this is going to be important for us to ground truth true what your community members are experiencing in their own personal lives as they're moving about the region. The next slide. I'm not going to read through all of this, but we will be preparing a technical memo on this, continuing engagement. We will be moving toward a phase in which we're going to have to prioritize and select projects. And you can see from the data that was provided today, there are different ways to look at this information, to map it. And that's going to weigh into different ways in which priorities and priority projects can be laid out. We just need to keep in mind that this program really is very much focused on eliminating fatal and serious injury crashes. It's not about eliminating all crashes, but really focusing in on the fatal and serious injury ones. So that has to be a factor that we'll be including in the prioritization. Next one. We went a couple minutes over, but we really want to open this up for any feedback that you might have. Let us know if what you're seeing is a surprise, it's what you might have expected, and any questions. And I'll turn it over to Kristen to navigate this part.
Yeah, I think our big kind of new information and sort of message of the day is about the high injury network and the high risk network. So if you have any questions, I believe we do have a few minutes. I can go back to any of those slides that you saw. I also have the maps pulled up if we wanted to kind of zoom into anything. We do only have a few minutes today. We will be sending this out to you, and then you'll also be reviewing the memo. So does anyone have any questions? Does the high risk network?
Excuse me, this is Mike Ludwig, City of Des Moines.
Great.
I did have a question on the map that showed the citizen comments to date, where there were different areas concerned. How many unique commenters does that represent compared to multiple comments by single people?
I think that's an excellent question. We'll ask Confluence if they can get into that data and identify the unique number of contributors.
Thank you.
I have more of a process question. It might be for Dylan or Zach, just so that we could all start thinking about the next steps in terms of that prioritization and eventually application for implementation. Do you have any sense of timeline or process? Like, for example, are we going to have individual communities apply for their own implementation grants, or are we thinking about a coordinated regional application for implementation?
I think that's probably something we still need to determine through talking with our safety action committee and the tech committee and exec and policy to kind of figure out what direction they want to go with it. I can see benefits to either direction, but I think that's probably something we need to still determine.
Thanks.
Tagging on to Luis's comment as far as process, have we had any sense from the experience so far in the cycles of the Safe Streets for All grant applications, knowing when the next NOFO is gonna come out? Are we thinking that's gonna be around the first of the year?
I believe, and somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the last one came out in spring. Is that right?
It was,
But it was earlier than the previous year. The last one, the first one had been in the fall, and then they switched it to the spring. So I would anticipate that this one is going to be in the spring again, but I don't know for sure.
now this last cycle was out in, I believe, January, February. The first submittals were in April. Was a demonstration, planning and demonstration project. The next submittal was in May. That's what the city of Des Moines hit. And then the third submittal, which is for planning and demonstrations, the second was both that and implementation, is in August. So I'm just trying to fit whatever we're doing here or the product here so we can so that member agencies can qualify and project that timeline.
Yeah, I mean, our plan would be to have this completed so that either the MPO or the member communities would go after an implementation grant in that next in that cycle next year.
Okay.
In 25. This plan is wrap up in the fall, and then we'd be able to start preparing that application for that next cycle.
All right. The two questions I have as far as the presentation. First, on the high entry network map and the high risk maps, maybe it's the scale, I couldn't quite see it on the, but are the interstate, any of the interstate routes included in either of the maps?
We don't have the interstate included in the maps. So
why?
Why? Again, generally speaking, those volumes on the interstate are, they tend to be very high crashes, but not nearly so high. They don't serious injury crash. They kind of wash any other segment out because just extremely high volumes. But there is a good point to be made to have some analysis there. It's just, it kind of needs to be segregated, but we can certainly look at that point and kind of pull the interstate in. It's definitely not because it's owned by another agency. We have all kinds of Iowa highways in there. So, but yeah, it's a good question, and we can certainly look at inclusion. We just need to find a way that it's not pulling an unfair amount of weight just by volume.
Right. I think it's important to identify whatever roadways are, and maybe you have an asterisk to it and you qualify it in the Des Moines high entry network. We do have some of the segments of I-235 identified as being in that high entry network. So because we're looking at trying to resolve this on a community-wide basis. So I would encourage you to kind of rethink that a little bit. The other question I had the opportunity last night, the workshop was for City of Des Moines and Polk County. To say the least, maybe the most, the participation was underwhelming, as it was just county staff and city staff and confluence. And I'm concerned. My question is, what are we seeing in the other community engagements workshops? Are we seeing similar, or and if we are, what's plan B?
I think I can try to address that item. As part of this project, we were asked to try to meet with each community in their setting. And I think that's proven to be a little bit challenging in that some of those communities, member communities, simply wanted a brief update at a council meeting. That was all they wanted. Others were more open to some type of like a pop-up event or open house. So it's been a distribution of different types of activities. And they haven't been promoted on a region-wide basis because they were intended to be a little more intimate within each setting. We do have other engagement events planned that will be more region-wide, and they'll be much more publicized. I think because they won't be so diluted, we'll probably see more participation at those individuals, because I think there will be 4 of those that will be much more targeted as like being region-wide.
I think it might be helpful to think about what are the outcomes that we're seeking from that outreach, because I would imagine that what we really want is that when it comes time for implementation, people understand the reasons. It can be kind of abstract to talk about, these networks and the statistics, but when you start talking about specific roadways, I think you get people's attention, hopefully and engagement a little more, and that hopefully they buy in to the eventual implementation.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, Luis, because my recollection of the grant applications were that there was a focus on how did you engage with the community, and a lot of that is relying on what is not necessarily for the particular projects you're putting forward in the action plan, but relying on the action plan engagement effort to then translate into those projects. So if there's anything that we can help with in any events that have a regional draw that are within the city of Des Moines, please let me know, and we'll do what we can to help support those. Thank you.
John, I'll just offer a quick additional note on the comment that you had on inclusion of interstates. So far, working on many of these plans around the country, we're generally seeing that exclusion of interstates in these studies is the most common practice. It generally comes out of some level of conversation with stakeholders and generally concluding that interstates are the influence that local agencies have necessarily on potential infrastructure investments on interstates is quite limited, and the interstates are being studied extensively at the state level. And sort of secondarily to that as well, finding that interstates are not really competitive locations for the pursuit of SS4A implementation grants, which is one of the sort of core goals or outcomes that we're hoping for out of these plans, where US DOT is really trying to sort of work directly with local agencies, and that certainly includes state-owned routes within local communities where they intersect and play a key role in the local network. But interstates in particular have been generally excluded and found to be generally discouraged from consideration for SS4A.
Yeah, I can understand and appreciate the SS4A component. However, I would say that if we're titling this as a comprehensive safety action plan for the Des Moines metro area, you got to have everything in there. Otherwise, it's not comprehensive. So however you footnote things or include, but when you look at funding grants, then yeah, you don't consider those drop off, but the high entry network in my mind is this is the network that we're considering and trying to figure out what our countermeasures and our funding is. So thank you.
Thank you, John.
Any other burning questions? Just want to remind folks as we wrap up that we do have a working group on this that consists of technical committee members as well as policy members and maybe I think members of the public, if I recall. So there is a group that's getting more in the weeds, more frequent updates on this project, and we appreciate the team's work thus far.
Thank you. And oh, sorry, give you a second for any other burning questions.
No, I think we're ready to move on.
Yeah. And we accept questions by email too. So if you see the slides and have any follow-up questions, please don't hesitate. And with that, I'll stop sharing.
Awesome. Thank you. Zach, do you have anything else before we move on?
I do not. Thank you. And thanks to the tool team for presenting today.
Yeah, absolutely. Look forward to seeing more. Next up, we have item 5. This is going to be a DART update. And Gunnar, I believe you're going to be introducing Amanda.
Yeah, I'll do it very briefly. I don't know if she needs much of an introduction, but all of you have probably been following the story of DART and wanting to make sure that we have a sustainable transit system for the region. And the challenge before us is figuring out how. And so we invited DART to come to the technical committee, and they'll be at policy committee later this month to give us an update on the process moving forward. Amanda Wonke.
Thanks, Gunnar, and thanks, Luis. Really appreciate the time to be here. I came on to DART as CEO in September and walked, right into, which I knew when I took the job, the immediate funding challenges and potential service cuts that we were facing as we began work on our FY25 budget. And so there's been a lot of work that's happened the last 9 months, and want to talk a little bit about that, and more importantly, where we're going next, and just wanted to introduce myself to many of you. Some of you I've worked with in my previous roles, and some of you I haven't. So for those of you I haven't met, I always appreciate getting to know more people in the community, and always please feel free to reach out to us. I know one of the things that's important to Luis and me and all of our staff is our relationships with all of the member communities, and even those who aren't members of DART but are members of MPO, we know are important to our region as a whole. So we just want you to know to always please feel free to reach out. With that, I will jump into just what I'm going to talk about. I only have 10 slides, so I promise I will keep it brief. Want to talk a little bit about the goal we have around building a shared vision and plan for the future. As I interviewed for the CEO role and talked with people and really looked back at my experience with DART, it feels like one of the biggest challenges for us, and this isn't new with regional issues, is coming to where we can have shared agreement on what we want moving forward. And that's not an easy thing. So we'll be talking about that process. And in the meantime, we have come to a short-term stability plan, thanks to a lot of work, and want to talk about that, as well as our plan to get to that long-term vision. And then I know for a lot of folks on this call, infrastructure is really important, and want to give a brief update on that. So the next slide, Gunnar, this just talks about, in brief, why we believe a shared regional vision is important. And as we talk about coming to that shared regional vision, we're really focusing on the next 10 years. I would love to focus on 20 years, 30 years, but we're trying to both come to a long-term enough goal that we provide some stability and some plan for our community and our region on how we can move forward. As you know, and have seen in the news right now, we are often in 1 or 2 year cycles of funding, and questions around cuts and questions of who's a member of DART and who's not. And we really want to provide some stability where we can. I understand there's never a perfect in our world around that, but we believe getting to a 10-year shared vision and plan is our goal through this process as a whole. And that's been the goal from the beginning. But in the meantime, while we get to the long term, we had to work on what that short term is. And that's where you guys have seen a lot of the news. And I know there's been a lot of conversation and help from the MPO and our member communities as well. If you go to the next slide, Gunnar, this shows some of the funding that all came together through the course of a lot of different events and conversation in order to maintain all of our service except for the D line, which I'm happy to answer any questions on that. But as again, MPO funding through the carbon reduction program helped with this. We are using some one-time capital and reserve funds that DART has. The city of Des Moines is giving funding above what we can collect through the property taxes. We are making some administrative cuts, and I'll talk about those a little bit more on the next slide. And then we do need to eliminate the D line, But with all of this kind of kitchen sink solution, we are able, for the most part, to provide stability to the region for the next 2 years, and then to allow staff and the commission to focus on that long-term plan. On the next slide, I just want to highlight some of the cuts we have made. As many of you know who've heard and been involved in conversations around DART, there's always, can we operate more efficiently? Can we, what can we do to make this more affordable and reduce increases in expenses? We've always talked about, and still holds true, service is the #1 driver of our costs, right? So if we really want to cut big dollars, we have to cut service, because the operator on the road, the benefits, the infrastructure, everything that goes with that is the expense. That said, we knew, and it was important to me coming in, that we did everything we could to look for places that weren't absolutely essential to getting service on the road. And every cut has an impact. These are all good things, but we really had to lean in and focus into that core service delivery focus. And so with that, we have, over the course of the last few months, had 4 position eliminations. As you may have seen announced in the news, we are eliminating onboard Wi-Fi. Again, something don't want to do. Staff isn't happy about it. We know there's riders who need it, but it's about $60,000 to $70,000 a year to provide that Wi-Fi. And as we look at our core service, if it's that or service on the road, a vehicle on the road, we have to prioritize the vehicle on the road. So with that too, we looked at our customer service hours and customer service staffing, and are shutting customer service a little earlier and on Sundays. Again, we want to be there for our customers. This is a hard thing, but on Sundays, as an example, we were getting 12 to 15 calls a day. That just wasn't justifying the staff we needed to have in. And so we've working on some alternative options for those customers. And then looking at a lot of little things that do add up, but also don't leave us much more to cut. And I'll say, like, there's memberships, there's things we're part of. We're talking about things that are a few $1,000s that we have cut. And, I'm proud of the staff, because it's a hard conversations and hard decisions. It also doesn't leave us much else in the future. It's not like there's much more to be found without it being service related. So just wanted everybody to have an overview of that. So if you get questions on DART funding and what we're looking to do to reduce expenses, you have that. So the next slide starts to go into what we're calling Reimagine DART, which is really trying to get to that shared vision for the next 10 years, along with the plan and the funding to go with that. We know it's easy to have a vision, but you have to be able to implement it as well. And so we're really trying to come to that shared understanding of what is most important for us to achieve through a regional transit system, some consensus on the level of service and service delivery model. And you often hear conversations, microtransit, big buses, what's most efficient. We've looked at these before, Luis and the planning team and others. We've done a lot of in-depth analysis. But we believe this needs to be a little bit more bringing the public along in the conversation, both for an understanding and ensuring that as I come on as CEO and we look at everything and show our community that we've looked at all the options and really have an open mind to what service in Des Moines could look like, as well as knowing we are growing as a community. We are getting asks for more service all the time. And as we grow, we need to plan for that. And there might be funding that can come along with that. And then, as always with DART, governance and how we fund, the funding model are key components of being able to do this work well. With that, the next slide outlines a couple of the key things we'll be doing over the coming months. So as we have a few things happening that will be happening at once, we're starting with commission workshops, and it's actually starting with member community surveys. So right now, all of your city council and county supervisors have surveys in their inboxes from DART. We're working with Baton Global on those surveys and really, again, trying to be transparent about where every community and every person is at to understand the lay of the land and have an open and transparent conversation. That will then go into interviews with facilitators in July. Each member community, it'll be the commissioner, and then their alternate and city manager or another elected official will be welcome to attend as well. And then going into facilitated workshops that will guide what are we trying to achieve with our system redesign? What does success look like as a region? And what things are on the table and off the table to be talked about? and reconsider, because as some of you have heard our chair Russ Trimble say, we have to look at everything, and we're trying to do that, but we need to decide first what we want to achieve, because we can't be everything to everybody. So we're having those workshops with the commission first. Right now we're working on the RFP for our system redesign, and we'll be putting that out a little bit later this summer, and then there will be community input throughout. And even right now, there's been a lot of community input the last year, and it's been really important and heartening to see. I think that's part of what has allowed us to come up with the short-term solutions, has been people talking about DART. So with that, the next slide just lays out some of what we're looking at in the service redesign. So you have the service redesign, and we have 18 months essentially to try and solve this problem, because we have a budget 2 years from now that we do not have a solution for, and it'll either involve some new design and new plan and system that people want to fund, or it'll involve some cuts, or again, plan C, if there's some ideas maybe we have staff haven't thought of. I know there's not a magic solution out there, but there's going to just be a lot of hard decisions, but we are also intent on ensuring we look at everything. And with that, we believe there are some other studies that need to come alongside that. One is looking at our fare policy, considering whether our fares that we charge are what they should be, what the impact would be of raising those fares, all the components of what we charge for different services, as well, as that funding and governance I talked about. And then one thing that we have been talking about, and you have seen with other projects in the region, is really that need for economic impact. And the MPO, I know, put in some money in the budget to look at a multimodal economic impact study, which would be a really great way for the MPO to support and talk about some of this work, not just for transit, because it isn't just us, it's how we connect together with walking, biking, and all of the systems in our community. So I hope that's something we're able to continue to move forward with, and appreciate Dylan and Gunner's help on that. And then moving to the next slide, this is just a quick overview of some things that we get questions on and you thought you might want to know that are happening related to infrastructure. So first, our fleet. We're continuing to diversify our fleet, looking at everything from a mix of 30-foot vehicles, 40-foot vehicles for our fixed routes, light-duty vehicles for on-demand and paratransit. We are working on our zero-emission transition planning. We have a zero-emission transition plan, but as we look at it and as we look at what's changing in the world of zero-emission, we need to keep updating that and making some more specific plans for the future. In addition, many of you have heard about our operations and maintenance facility. The commission has approved, and we have fully funded phase 1 and are looking to break ground on that this fall. And then we are looking to kind of fund the different phases as we go. So we have a grant application out right now that we're waiting to hear back from the FTA on, and are continuing to evaluate other future funds. And main reason for a new facility is that improving the facility we're at and making it what it needs to be to last for 50 years, which is what's required for the FTA, is just not feasible on the land we're on. And so for many reasons, a new facility ends up being better for local taxpayers because of what the federal government can contribute to it. Then stops, shelters, and benches. We have 52 active bus shelters, 15 active benches, and we have new or soon to be installed shelters coming in Ankeny, Des Moines, Johnston, Urbandale, and Windsor Heights. Really appreciate the folks on this call and others in your communities working with us both on how to make those shelters and stops and everything work, along with when you're doing roadway redesign projects. Appreciate you reaching out and having the conversation with us to ensure that that transit and pedestrian access and bus stop placement works. And I think there's a real tie in there between those conversations and the previous work on safety and accidents, right? I never like the calls I get that someone has stepped off one of our buses and gotten hit when crossing the road, or any accident. So working together is the best thing we can do to make this safe for everybody. And then, of course, technology for us is really key for all of us right now, whether it is our customer-facing technology, such as our app and our trip planner. There was conversations about eliminating our trip planner as a savings. And we really heard from members of our community, especially some of our folks who are sight impaired, how much they rely on that technology to help them find bus stops, to help them know where they're going. And so that, along with, we really want to move to online paratransit reservations and some other technology improvements for the customer. and to also look where technology can help us do our work better and more efficiently. So that's an overview, quick overview of a lot of things happening. I think my next slide is just the wrap up of open to any questions. And also, I know you guys have more on your agenda. Always just know you can reach out to Luis and I at any time as well.
Thank you, Amanda. Any questions for Amanda?
Thanks all.
I got one just real quick. Great presentation, Amanda. Thank you for the information. Just out of curiosity, the D line, what do you have an idea what the cost was for that service or to run that?
Yeah, D-Line is about just about 600,000 for what we run it at currently, and the city of Des Moines was contributing almost 350 of that. Operation Downtown was doing about 50,000, and then DART was about 200,000. Luis, do I have that about
Yes.
right? Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay. Have a good day, everybody, and hope to see you soon.
Thank you. Okay, next up, item 6, we have a report and vote on fiscal year 24-27 TIP amendments. Zach?
Yes, thank you. We have a couple of TIP amendment requests from DART. The first one is for a technology and ridership promotion. This project was awarded $80,000 in ICAP funding. It did not get originally programmed in the 2024 TIP, so we had a request to get that programmed so that DART can expend those funds yet this fiscal year. The next project also from DART was for their Route 17 extension to Bondurant. This was another project that was awarded ICAP funding, a little over 104,000, and also needs to be amended in the 24 TIP so they can expend those funds. I would note that we also have an additional request that's coming from the Iowa DOT regarding DART funding. This is for the CRP funding that was awarded to DART, the $3.6 million. The DOT has requested that we amend that in the 24 TIP as well, so that they can get that transferred over to the FDA. We got the request late, so we weren't able to get that on this agenda, but just wanted to make you aware that we will be putting that on the exec and policy agendas this month, in addition to these two amendments. Happy to take any questions you have. Otherwise, this is before you for your approval.
Questions for Zach? We have a motion and a second.
I'll move, neighbor.
Second, Davis.
Thank you. Looking for any dissenting votes, any nays on this item? Hearing none, the item passes. Next up, we have item 7, a report and vote on the draft 25-28 TIP. Zach?
Thank you. Staff has completed the draft 25 through 28 transportation improvement program. We will be submitting this to the Iowa DOT for their comments on June 15th. We would request that you please take a look at your projects. The projects begin on page 40 of the draft. Take a look at them, make sure that all the project descriptions are accurate, make sure all the funding totals are accurate, and make sure that all the projects are programmed in the correct year. We had a number of requests to move projects around. I'm happy to say that we were able to get everybody's requests accommodated. On the next slide, we have a couple of tables to just show you the fiscal constraint. The STBG side has to be fiscally constrained. So you can see there for each of the 4 years, this TIP covers the balance there at the bottom. We are in the positive. So we're happy that we were able to accommodate all the requests to move funding around. And then on the TAP side, while we're not required to stay fiscally constrained, the TAP one's on the next slide. While we're not required to be fiscally constrained within the TAP program, we are currently showing a positive balance in each of those years. As I mentioned, we will send this on to the DOT, and they will review it. We'll take any comments that they provide to us, as well as any comments we get from the public and from our member governments. We'll take those into account when we finalize the TIP in July. Happy to take any questions you have on the draft TIP. Otherwise, it's before you for your approval.
Thank you, Zach. Questions for Zach? Let's ask for a motion and a second.
So moved, Woewarding.
I'll second, neighbor.
Thank you. Are there any dissenting votes, any nays on this? Hearing none, the item passes. Next up, item 8. I believe this is just a report on the capital improvement program update.
Yeah, I can kick this off. I want to introduce Josh Squires. Josh is our summer intern. He's a student at the University of Iowa School of Planning and Public Affairs. So he's joined us, and one of the things he's working on is the Transportation Capital Improvement Program. So I'll turn it over to Josh to explain what this is and what we're looking for from everybody.
Thanks, Dylan. So my work for this summer, one of my main projects is making a regional transportation capital improvement plan for the fiscal years of 2025 through 2028. So in this, I'll be encompassing all the local municipalities, counties, and Iowa DOT within the planning area and all their projects that they will be doing transportation related. I'll be organizing these projects by jurisdiction, project type, fiscal year, funding, and their funding source. In my final output, my goal is to make a ArcGIS story map that encompasses all the TCI projects within the MPO planning area, and create this interactive map that can be easily accessible for the public. If everyone could, in this meeting, could please send me your most up-to-date TCIP or CIP by no later than Friday, June 21st. This would allow me to maintain my current project timeline. And my next steps in this project is to continue gathering CIP data from municipalities. Thank you for your time. And is there any questions?
Questions for Josh? Okay, thank you, Josh. I imagine there'll be a follow-up email with those instructions. Just please make sure you get back to him by his deadline.
Thank you.
Next up, item 9, CRP update.
Thank you. We want to provide you with a quick update on the CRP program. You may recall that at the last tech meeting, it was recommended that we put together a subcommittee to review the process moving forward as far as how the CRP funds, the remaining CRP funds, will be awarded. We had 5 volunteers to be members of the subcommittee. They're before you on the screen there. They met on May 16th to discuss this process. Next slide. There was a really good discussion at that meeting. It probably lasted around an hour. We talked about a number of things. One of the things we discussed was investigating an option as to whether or not we could suballocate the CRP funding. We did check with Iowa DOT, and much like STBG, we will not be able to do a suballocation for CRP. So the next things that we discussed were what that process would look like. The committee was in agreement that they wanted to see an application process that was open to all members and all eligible uses, trying to keep it as broad as possible to meet any kind of projects that were eligible that member efforts might want to apply for. We talked about staggering the timing of the CRP application so it did not conflict with the STBG and TAP. This was more for time management for communities so they don't have to be worrying about submitting CRP applications along with STBG and TAP applications. Another benefit to this is that if a CRP application were not to be successful, there would be an option then to apply for STBG funds for, say, like an ITS project, for example. Finally, we also talked about using carbon reduction as the main kind of key evaluation criteria of these applications. So we are checking in with Iowa DOT to kind of look how they do their ICAP program and try to maybe model something off of that. As far as next steps go, we will begin to draft application materials that we can share with the CRP subcommittee, hopefully towards the end of June, early July. We'll then finalize those application materials to present to tech, exec, and policy in August, we're planning to do. And then that would allow us to open up that CRP application process, hopefully sometime in September, October, which again would be prior to when the STBG process would then start later at the end of the year. So that's where we're at with the CRP program update. Happy to take any questions you have. I just wanted to give you that quick update to see that we're moving forward with that process. Also, if there's anybody from the subcommittee that would like to weigh in on how the committee meeting went, or if I missed anything, please feel free to jump in.
Zach, this is Mike Ledwig. During our meeting, we discussed looking into and making sure that anything that was currently funded by STPG funds that maybe could have fallen under the CRP funds. Should we be looking at possibly switching some of that funding so that there's more flexibility with STBG funds than there are with the CRP funds? Did you find out any information on that?
We had not looked into that, and we can circle back to that, Mike. I apologize, but we did not look into actually doing that. I may have misunderstood how that discussion wrapped up at the subcommittee meeting, so we'll circle back on that and look into that in some more detail.
Okay, thank you very much.
Other questions for Zach? Thanks for that update. Next up, we have a report on the charging and fueling infrastructure discretionary grant program. Carl?
Yeah, thank you. So the charging and fueling infrastructure discretionary grant round 2 has the NOFO was released this past month. This round, there's $1.3 billion in funding available. This is for electric fueling, hydrogen, natural gas. We focused our previous grant application last year on about 150 electric vehicle charging stations. That grant was unsuccessful. However, as part of this funding round, previously submitted applications can be reevaluated for funding, and there's a $520 million available for previously submitted applications. So staff plans to resubmit our application. The deadline for that is on July 1st. And then there's another round of funding of $800 million available for new applications. So staff intends to create a round 2, and we'll be meeting, that deadline is on August 28th. So we plan to reach out to our member communities and learn more about their desire to be part of that round 2 request. There's webinars on the NOFO today at 1:30 p.m. and then another for the reconsideration applications on June 11th. And then once those webinars wrap up, we plan to have an informational meeting here at the MPO on Wednesday, June 19th to discuss our round 2 application with stakeholders. So with that, I would welcome any questions.
Carl, is the assumption that a round 2 would be similar in like publicly available electric vehicle charging?
Yes,
Or
yeah,
is it
the
wide open?
NOFO is the same. It's all has to be publicly available charging locations.
Other questions for Carl? Thanks for that update, Carl.
Yeah, thank you.
Next up, item 11, a report on upcoming events with Z.
Yep, thank you. So we have prepared some webinars and upcoming events. I would like to highlight a few. June 6th, I think that's today, we have a webinar on managing parking for trails. June 11th, we have innovations in accessibility. June 16th, we have 3 ways to estimate the economic impact of trails and outdoor recreation. I thought those are pretty interesting webinars to highlight. And then July 11th, we have the Iowa County Engineers Association Mid-Year Conference up in Ames. And then kind of special note, next week, June 12th, MPO will be hosting a training on how to use the Streetlight software now that we have access to that program. So I've reached out to different member communities, getting different users set up and access to Streetlight. So if your community has not have access yet or would like access, please reach out to me, or if you would like to sign up for the training, please let me know. That training is next Wednesday, June 12th. Happy to answer any questions.
See, I'll just say that we really appreciate moving quickly on that streetlight data once the decision was made and getting this training going. It seemed like there was a lot of interest there. So thank you.
Thanks.
Next up, other non-action items of interest to the committee.
I have one quick one on the growth scenario. Just wanted to update you that we have received the final transportation analysis zone file from HDR. So we are able to start moving forward on the growth scenario. Staff has prepared an Excel worksheet as well as an online map of the TAZs. We will be sending out an email probably early next week with that information and directions on how to complete the growth scenario, as well as what the deadline to get those back to us will be. So just be on the lookout for that early next week.
Thank you, Zach.
Yep. And then one more, the Active Transportation Infrastructure Investment Program grant deadline is coming up on June 17th. This grant would help. There's 2 sections of this grant as well, one of which is for planning. So staff intends to submit a planning application to help identify a regional active transportation network. We anticipate asking for about 200,000. The floor award is 100,000. So we're just looking for feedback on this this effort as we look to apply for this fund.
Okay, with that concludes our meeting content. We do have our next meeting scheduled for July 11th. I guess maybe just as a clarifying point, did I just see that's the same date as a conference? Am I misremembering that in the past? The county, it's County Engineers Association. Okay, so that's not one that necessarily as many folks are going to, so there wasn't a conflict. I'm sorry, I just misremember. I remember in the past that we had to reschedule technical committee when there was a conference that many people were attending. But in any case, thank you for that. So July 11th, 9:30 a.m. And with that, I will seek a motion and a second for adjournment.
So moved. Jeff, May.
Second, Neighbor.
Thank you, Jeff and Steve. Any dissenting votes? Any nays? Hearing none, we stand adjourned. Thank you very much. See you later.